All right. Today we're going to talk about the Living Legend format and how we can save it. I apologize if I'm a little quiet. The dog is chomping on his dinner behind me. But let's talk about Living Legend. Um, I'm one of like 10 people that enjoys this format, and I have some real reservations about how I think LSS is handling it and what I think they think the format should be. Um, so right at the top, I just want to say that like generally speaking, I'm really happy with like 90% of what of the decisions that LSS makes, and that I think that the problems with Living Legend honestly probably boil down to just like they're having a real hard time killing their darling. Uh, so let's talk about it and let's kind of dive into it. So first and foremost, what's the deal with this format? Why don't people like it? Why were there only like 20 total Living Legend Pro quests and with like 5 weeks across the world, right? Is this format impossible to balance because of cards like Bloodsheath Skelda and Counter Blessings, Art of War, Starvo, etc.? Do people like it? The answer is the answer is no. Obviously, people don't like it. But why don't they like it? Is it because it's unfun? Just inherently? Is it because it's too aggressive? Is it because it's too degenerate? Is it because the format devolves into Starvo format? Uh, and lastly, is like the problem with LL like a card availability standpoint? This is like a point that I've heard people bring up that I think might be more reasonable than it sounds. Is that like unless you were playing like when say Briar was like in the format like me, right? Or Viscerai was in the format, to use a more recent example, or Zen was in the format. Like if you are a newer player who missed these LL heroes, you have to go in order to play like your Living Legend Battle Hardened or ProQuest or whatever. You've got to go hunt down like cards that are like not necessarily readily available. Like if you want to play like Boomer Chain, you've got to go hunt down your copies of Seeds of Agony and Riftbinds and all of that. Belittles. And it's just like, is that really like a hurdle people want to like get over in order to play a format that the rest of the player base seems to hate? So these are like kind of the big three complaints I've seen with the format. Obviously, like the balance and the fun aspect are like brought up way more frequently, but I do think that there is something to this like card availability thing. So we're going to talk about that too. But I think all of this is a symptom of the fact that I think that LSS has like given this format an identity crisis. And they don't really know what their vision for it is. And by that, really, I think they have two competing visions for what the format should be. So let's talk about that. I think that LSS wants Living Legend to at once be this powerful, bonkers, broken format where you get to play all the degenerate stuff. You get to play everything that they've printed with like very basically light restrictions. You get to do the combos. You get to play Starvo. You get to pop off with Skeleton and Sonata. You get to play Art of War. You get to gain 50 something life with Counter Blessings. All of that. They want you to be able to do all of those things. And more recently, say in the past year, they also want this to be a competitively viable and competitively embraced format, as evidenced by the fact that like they are forcing people to play it at Worlds, and they made it a option for ProQuest season. All of this, they have begun to push for this to be seen as a competitively viable format, as a legitimate format. I don't think that those two things can necessarily coexist. I think that if you listen to them talk about Living Legend in like the articles and the dev talks, they have really kind of shifted in the past year. They want this to be like the legacy format, like legacy from Magic the Gathering. But at the same time, they also want it to be like vintage, like kitchen table vintage, where you can just play whatever and do whatever. And those do not go together. Legacy is like a powerful, eternal format, but it is also one that like has been curated over the course of many years to be the powerful and yet still competitively viable, competitive integrity having format that it is. and I keep saying the word powerful because that's the word that LSS uses, and I don't think that I don't have a good idea of what it is, because the word power is a contextual within like what we're talking about. Like right now, like Flick Knife's Mask of Momentum is very powerful in Classic Constructed. That's not necessarily doesn't cut it in Living Legend, for example. Lightning Strike is a powerful card in Standard. It does not hold up in any other format. So there's a couple things we can draw, like clear takeaways, insights we can glean from how LSS views the format, just based on what they have done, how they talk about it, and how they've kind of approached it. So first things first, they do not want to ban or errata heroes in this format. That's pretty obvious from its name, from the inception of the format, and from the fact that you could still play Bravo Star of the Show. They want every hero to be viable in this format. And they don't want to errata heroes in this format to be balanced. They don't even want to like unerrata heroes. For example, like we have to play with errated once per turn Briar. We don't get the original Briar hero text. They don't want to ban, errata, or restrict certain cards. We're going to get into that. There's why is Sonata still legal in this format, right? They don't want to, they're like very weirdly picky and choosy about what they want to hit in this format. And I think that until they have like a better idea of what they're going to have to do for this format to be even resemble being like balanced, it's going to stay unpopular and people are going to not want to play it. And when people do play it, they're going to just be like, Starvo is still the best deck, and they're just going to play Starvo. This is the thing that like every time there has been a major Living Legend event, every pro that I know has kind of just shrugged their shoulders and said, I'm going to play Starvo, or maybe Chain, right? So they've got to overcome this perception of this format. And I have a couple of ideas about how they can do that. If they want this format to be Legacy, the Legacy equivalent, they have to understand that Legacy is not a free-for-all. Legacy is really centered around the blue cards, Wasteland, and a couple of other sort of pillars of the format. And they clearly they know that they understand like this concept of like a pillar, and they want there to be these pillar cards in LL that can kind of keep things in check. But I think that the issue goes a lot more deeper and is a lot more structural than that. But I want to talk about pillars because I do think that like this is like a viable way to approach an Eternal format. So in Legacy, and to a lesser extent Vintage, pillar cards or pillar strategies are sort of like these foundational bones that the rest of the format can sort of coalesce around. And they'll always be good, or they're always going to be respectable. They may or may not ever be like the best at any given point in time, but no one's ever going to laugh at you for like choosing to pick one of these decks up. And another thing too is like pillar cards, or like groups of cards, can go into multiple decks to either like, if it's a off meta deck or it's a brew, kind of legitimize it, or like go into more established shells to like make just a solidified sort of like default good deck, right? And so like I think the two that really come to mind for me when we're talking about Legacy are Wasteland and Force of Will. If you're trying to do something degenerate with your lands or your mana, there's Wasteland to deny you of that. Wasteland pops up in dedicated land destruction decks. It pops up just as a value piece and a whole host of decks, but it is just this powerful tool that can keep really degenerate and otherwise hard to interact with strategies in check. And kind of on the flip side of that, you've got like Brainstorm, Force of Ponder, Force of Will Days, this like group of blue cards that provide card selection and card advantage and really powerful no questions asked, unconditional interaction. Um, Force of will, I think, is like a large part of the reason why like Legacy as a format is like so goated, basically, um, because it is a free counterspell that's unconditional. It just interacts with whatever dumb bullshit your opponent is trying to do, and it gets worse in fair matchups, but it's still reasonable. But it's even like if on turn 0 someone tries to combo off in Legacy, Force of Will allows you to have some form of interaction, some way to break up a degenerate, unfair, uninteractive instant win. There's a ton more cards that you could argue are pillars in Legacy. You could say, I think, there's like the Graveyard Hate, like Tormod's Crypt, rest in peace, that kind of thing. You could say Delver might be, or at one point in time, Delver was like a pillar of the format, Deathrite Shaman. These things change and come and go, but like for the most part, these they serve as a way to have powerful, splashable interaction that gives like fair decks a way to play the game. So what are some possible pillars that can like define what Living Legend is as a format? And we already know what one answer to that question is. It's Warmonger's Diplomacy. They literally said it in this banned and restricted announcement. And in the last banned and restricted announcement, when they put it to 3, they clearly think that this card is like like the dam. It's like the meme of the dude taking all the arrows in the back, and it's like Warmongers. It's like all the degenerate stuff, a healthy format, and then they got Warmongers just like tanking it all. Clearly that's not working, but we're going to get to that. So Warmongers basically slows down everybody who is trying to do a lot of shit. Notably, this is Runeblades because they have to pick action or non-action. It also affects like Dio, Rangers, a couple other heroes. And it's got very low opportunity cost. So when I say it's splashable, that's what I mean. It's a blue, it blocks 3. It's super low opportunity cost to put this in your deck. And it can be put in a lot of different decks, right? So something like a ninja deck like Zen can just run this as just a blue that blocks for 3. If it's a matchup where it's not relevant, they just block with it or they pitch it. They don't care. But it also like can buy a deck like Zen, or maybe if we ever see like Phi or something like that, it can buy them the space to like get a like end on this as basically a chain ender and gain them like they get to keep tempo, or they like to get to throw like this sort of like combo turn off. And then slower decks like Guardians can use it as well as like a block out Warmongers you. I still had an impactful turn. So yeah, this clearly should be at 3. I think this is like a good call from LSS. Kind of the counterpart to this is Art of War. Art of War, again, I don't think that they have ever touched this card in this format. They clearly think that this is sort of like a counterpart to Warmongers in a way, and that this is like a key enabler for the aggressive strategies of the format. It's super flexible. It digs you deep to pieces that you need. It gives stuff go. It can unbreak a hand with go again. I love this card, and I have loved this card since I first saw it. I think it's really cool because it enables more than just like, it's my Art of War turn, I'm going to use my Tunic resource, I'm going to buff all my stuff, I'm going to draw 2 more cards and buff all my stuff. Which is like what it does in Zen, right? But Runegate Chain, this is just like an engine piece to get stuff out of your hand into your banish zone where you can play it. Like Runegate Chain, you're hardly ever doing the like buff option. You're using this to like unbrick your hand basically. LSS is clearly fine with this card. Like I said, I don't think they've ever touched it in this format. And one thing too that I think is interesting for both these cards is that as the hero and card pools grow, we will find more and more uses for them. Or like Warmongers will get more relevant as time goes on, just kind of by definition. Warmongers will get more relevant against more decks. Likewise, as more decks, more mechanics, more cards get introduced, we will find more uses for Art of War. So I think these are the two obvious answers. Counter Blessings. Everybody hates this card. I think this card's fine. LSS recently put this to 1 copy, which is basically banning it. And they specifically cited that people don't like playing against this card. And that's why it was banned in CC. That's why it's been restricted in Living Legend. And this might be a hot take. I don't think that's a valid reason. I think that Counter Blessings is a really interesting sort of like control card or like value card or whatever you want to call the archetype in Flesh and Blood, because it forces aggro decks to make one of two decisions. It's either I'm going to present actual disruption to you, something like a Red in the Ledger, right? Or Judge, Jury, Executioner, something that has a meaningful effect, right? Either forces aggro decks to be able to have those on hits, or it forces aggro decks to be able to push through enough damage to kill you before you see all 9 copies of Counter Blessings. You cannot simply just like 0 for 3, 0 for 3, 0 for 3 chain enter every turn. At the same time, right, the defensive decks that play Counter Blessings, like you're just trying to win on a damage versus life axis. You can't, because you've put 9 cards in your deck that don't block, which means that you have 9 cards in your deck that cannot stop on hit effects. Basically, stuff as basic as like Briar getting embodiments becomes a lot harder to stop. Stopping Mask of Momentum draws becomes harder. Boom grenades, burn up shocks, snatches, all this stuff Force of Nature turns, Guardian crush effects are all much harder to stop if you have 9 non-blocks in your deck. I think that this is fine in this format. Also, this would like crumble to Duskblade strategies. This like doesn't interact in any way other than gaining life. So stuff like Duskblade, Illusionists, that kind of thing. Other fatigue decks, this doesn't do anything. I understand that like it might be miserable to play against, and that there is some argument for that. For example, like Legacy banned Sensei's Divining Top, not because it was too good, but because it took too long to resolve all those effects. So I think this is fine. Come at me in the comments if you think that this is a mistake of a card and that I'm crazy. Moving on, we've got the Rune Chant package. So these are all generic Runeblade cards that all make or interact with Rune Chants in some way. I think that, broadly speaking, this stuff is fine. I think that it enables interesting strategies. I think that the cost reduction cards that Runeblade gets, like Ninth Blade, Rune Flash, I think those are cool cards. These are enablers for that. I think that stack strategies like Stack Florian or Stack Viscerai, I think that those are fun and interesting. Deadwood Dirge and Malefic Incantation and Read the Runes are enablers for really cool decks like Runegate Chain. They have a lot of applications. However, they are also part of a stupid, degenerate, bullshit, broken combo. And basically, I think that 5 of these 6 cards are fine. And the 6th one has got to go. And basically, I think that the card that needs to go is Sonata, because I think that Bloodsheath Skeleton is like a really cool card that can enable some really cool plays. For example, there's like really cool Briar decks that will play like Bloodsheath Skeleton and then let's say Vexen Quillhand, right? To make some Rune Chants and then like play a Channel Mount Heroic for free and then like a big attack. I think that's really cool. That's a really interesting interaction. Likewise, I think that like making just any, attack in like making a Felling of the Crown free in Florian is like a cool way for the Florian to get tempo back if they're like a stack Florian or whatever. The problem though is the way that it interacts with Sonata's cost means that no, until you remove Sonata from the equation, the best way to play Bloodsheath Skeleton and all these other cards is going to be stack 20 Rune Chants, draw 10 cards with Sonata, dome your opponent, and then kill them with Go Again. And that's too good. That's why we don't have Rosetta Thorn, and that's why Deadwood Dirge is restricted again. I think that you can give those cards back if you ban Sonata. It is kind of strange to me that they haven't banned Sonata. I don't even think that we need to restrict it to like one copy. I think we could do that and it might effectively be the same thing, but I think that we should just ban Sonata. It is the problem card. As much as I love resolving Sonatas, we should just ban it. Card advantage in Flesh and Blood is like a very closely guarded resource, and Sonata Skeleton is just like broken card draw. So I think that if we remove Arcanics, all of this stuff can stay, and it enables cool stuff. Like RuneGate Chain is like a dead, deceased deck now, and I think that deck was awesome. That deck was so cool, and we never really got to see it really refined and really like never really had its chance to shine. I think that anything that, and this is a general rule, anything that facilitates a deck in Living Legend that we did not see in Classic Constructed is a good thing, in my opinion. RuneGate Chain fits that bill exactly. The Zephyr Needle package, speaking of decks we never got to see in CC, the Value Needle Ira deck, I think, was really cool. And it was like, to my knowledge, it was like the first time that like sort of the best deck in the LL format was just like a fair value pile that wasn't trying to do anything particularly crazy or go over the top. It was just numbers. I understand that like being able, like playing all the dagger buffs makes like the drawback to Zephyr Needle like non-existent, and so you get this really like fun, to me, interesting like value loop with like Retrieve and Flick Knives and Zephyr Needle and all of that. I think that that's cool. I think that's good. I think that that's interesting, and I don't think that a deck just being pure numbers is a bad thing. I think that this deck was like banned out of the format before it really had a chance, before anybody really had a chance to like explore it, or the format had a chance to react to it. I think like CYB, it requires you to commit to like a huge percentage of your deck facilitating the strategy, because you have to play like 3 needles in case you flick one and it gets like eaten by an invert existence or something. So you got to play like 3 copies of needles. You've got to play Conceal Blade. You've got to play like 9 copies of Upsticks and Run. You've got to play probably 3 to 6 copies of, what's that? Pick Up the Point, I think is the 0 is like the head jab with Retrieve. You commit your arms to being Flick Knives. There's like a really large opportunity cost to playing these cards. I think that really only shines in like Ira. I know that like Zen, Phi, whatever can like play this, but like then you run into the chance of like the wrong half of the deck problem where like you draw like an Upsticks, an Art of War, like a red Upsticks, an Art of War, and like some other like random bullshit, and your hand just kind of doesn't do anything. Which again, like I think is, if anything, a good thing, right? There, so I think that the opportunity cost offsets potentially like the pure numbers that you would get from this. But this would be like right in the middle of the road of just like fair numbers, Flesh and Blood. That is still like interactable, because, you know, like the needles don't really present on hits. They are just numbers. You can like go around it by racing it. You can go bigger than it by comboing it. There's a lot of stuff you can do here. All the ice disruption. This is all fully legal in CC. You can play, max copies of all of this. We have a ton of ice heroes in the format. There's Lexi, Oldhim, Jarl, Icelander, and Starvo, I guess. Ideally not that, but this is real disruption. This is real. I'm going to interact with you. I'm going to throw you off your game plan. I'm not going to let you do your thing. I think that the fact that all this disruption is not relevant in this format is like a huge red flag to me. Um, I think that, like, you know, obviously ice really throws off aggro decks. Aether Ice Vein is damage and disruption. You've got stuff like Winter's Bite and Amulet of Ice, which are like target effectively like the closest we'll ever get to Thoughtseize. Channel Lake Frigid does like a ton of work against decks that are trying to do a lot of anything. I think that all of this, the format should be designed such that this is always playable. The problem is none of this interaction is relevant. And also you have decks like Icelander that just like potentially Icelander could be good, right? But the problem is that they haven't back printed cards for her the way that, say, Briar has gotten multiple cards that slot into her shell that have improved her. Same with Viserai, same with Starvo. Icelander honestly needs some way to finish the game after playing all this disruption. Like the other packages that we've talked about, there's an opportunity cost to playing this stuff. There's a lot of 2 blocks, lots of blues, and potentially like fatigable. Like if you're Icelander and you have just this finite amount of damage in your deck, a CYB deck is just gonna A, B, and heal until they fatigue you out of the game. Which would require, again, like counter play and setup from the Wizard player. Basically, I think this whole package is right on the verge of playability. The problem is that like there's just not enough of a payoff to it. The Guardian Suite of Disruption is another set of disruptive and interactive cards that are kind of overshown by the fact that they go into Starvo, and Starvo's a mistake. The Elemental Guardians, so Jarl and Ultim, could make the best use of this. A classic control deck where they block, they send big haymakers. Something like an Oaken Old is akin to like a big blue finisher from MTG. It crosses like class and elemental lines too. So like Crown of Seeds can go into multiple heroes. Again, like Stack Florian or like sort of Fatigue Control Briar all use Crown of Seeds really well. The problem is with all of these cards, they just go into Starvo, and Starvo's a mistake. And so these cards are never used for lack of a better term, for like a fair purpose. They're just placed in the most broken shell possible. And like, there's no reason to experiment with other ways to use these cards. And there's no reason to like let Crown of Seeds exist in the format when the best Crown of Seeds deck is Starvo. Even though it could go in like numerous other decks and be like a bit like allow for more deck building or for more strategies. This brings me to my point that the problem with this format is Bravo Star of the Show. This deck has been a problem. It has been the worst part of this format since the beginning. The very first LL Battle Hardened 2 years ago was just 8 Starvo in the top 8. I think it was like 36 players, and I think maybe 32 of them were playing Starvo. He has this here just does not need to exist. It really cramps the format. As I've said, it cramps our ability to experiment with deck building. It limits what cards can be legal in the format. It pushes other strategies out of the format. And frankly, like, I would say we need to ban this hero. I don't think that there's any way to ban list our way to a point where Starvo's not a problem, short of banning all of his cards. And even if we banned all of his cards, like a Starvo shell that's running like, I don't know, Peck Perfects and Batter to a Pulps and like Crush the Weeks, Boulder Drop, you know, like how many cards would we have to ban or restrict in Guardian that have these like crush effects that Starvo makes unfair and uninteractable, right? You only have so much armor, and you only have so many D reacts that you can reasonably play. Instead of banning all of that, why not just ban this hero? um, and if they're, but the thing is, they're clearly committed to every hero needs to be playable, right? And I understand that. So errata him. I think that, this is if you're playing Living Legend, you are already deep enough into Flesh and Blood that you can understand what an errata is. So we should just errata this to be a once per turn, or not a once per turn, but a pick one. If you reveal the 3 elements, you get to pick what you want. You can give something, give it dominate, give it +2, give it go again so you can swing the hammer. I think those 2 options are the only way that we are able to move forward with Living Legend in a way that is worth competitively playing. So, where do we go from here? I think I've made my case pretty reasonably. I say we ban Starvo, or at least errata him. And that should be our first priority. We need to fundamentally change how that hero works. From then, we need to focus on banning the cards that break whole suites of cards. We don't need to ban Deadwood Dirge. We need to ban Sonata. Sonata is for example, Sonata is the broken card. The more decked archetypes and the broader spectrum of cards that can be played across heroes and strategies, the better. We need to identify the ban and restricted philosophy needs to be, we are identifying the cards that condense strategies into a singular point and get rid of those. And then we also need expansion slots and supplemental slots need to be used to print support directly into the format. We've already done this once. Briar and Oldhim both got expansion slot cards that cannot be used in CC. Oldhim got a specialization after he Living Legend, and Briar got Rosetta had the Earth and Lightning split card that is just a Briar card. It's a Briar specialization without saying it. So they've been proven that they'll do it. We just there needs to be there's already a pipeline to directly print answers into a format without necessarily having to send it all the way through Classic Constructed. And finally, if you really want people to pick up and play this format, they need to be able to buy Armory decks. The Viserai Prism decks were like a con thing. They don't count. The closest thing to an LL Armory deck that we've got is Lexi. Or not Lexi, but Aurora. Although maybe we could do a Lexi Armory deck. But that would you could print cards and majestics and specializations in those for LL heroes. They never touch CC. They don't throw that format out of whack, and you just print the support directly into Living Legend. I think if we do this, starting with a fundamental change to Starvo, we will see an immediate improvement in the format. That's, I think, where we need to go. I think that's what we need to be doing. The reason that I think that we're not doing this is because I don't think that LSS wants to bite the bullet and admit that not all heroes should be legal. I think that their darling is this idea that Living Legend is a format where you can play any hero. Because obviously you would want that in a game where people form attachments to heroes. Like I have really fond memories of Viserai and Briar, and learning the game with those heroes and going to like events with those heroes. I miss them. LL is like my outlet to play those heroes again. And that's true for everybody. The one Living Legend ProQuest I went to was won by Zachary Wallach playing Dromai, and he just misses playing Dromai. I totally get that. I think that that is a great goal to have. I don't think that the number of players that have a sort of sentimental attachment to Bravo Star of the Show is particularly high. I think most people don't like that deck. I don't think people particularly enjoy playing it. And I don't think that it being errated to be, more in line with like an actual reasonable hero ability or outright banned would really upset anybody, except for maybe people who all like just want to win. Uh, and I think that they don't want to pull that trigger. I think that they understandably don't want to necessarily like have to break from that vision. I think that they have a real emotional attachment to that idea, and I totally get that. I don't think that that is like a bad thing to be like emotionally attached to the game that you've built. But I think that if you want to push it as a competitively viable format that has like a sort of inherent integrity to it, you have got to admit that Starvo's a mistake. Starvo warps this format, and Starvo ultimately has to be fundamentally changed if you want people to be willing to play this format. If you want them to be excited for the World Championships, if you want them to be excited for deck building and for discovering new interactions and strategies, if you want stores to be willing to host these events, you've got to admit that something's not working. I think the most obvious thing that's not working is that you have this hero sucking all the air out of the room. But anyway, that's my presentation. I have talked for, it looks like 36 minutes, and I am out of breath and my mouth is dry. If you disagree, if you agree, if you just want to call me, I don't know, a fart head, do it in the comments. Sound off. I'm sure no one will come for me, but those are my thoughts. Let me know what yours are.